Listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Copeland Center's webinar, Intentional Peer Support with our team of presenters, Eva Dech and Stephen Morgan. I'm Katie Wilson. I am the Director of Operations for the Copeland Center. We're so very happy that so many of you could join us today. I'm joined also by our Executive Director, Matthew Federici. Today we're going to hear a presentation from Eva and Stephen, who come to us from the Intentional Peer Support community, followed by a little opportunity for people to ask questions, and then we'll be answering those questions at the end of the program. This webinar is being recorded, so we will have an opportunity for anyone who missed out on this presentation to catch up on it at a later date. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Matthew.
All right, thank you, Katie. Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the Copeland Center's webinar series. Hope you'll continue to join them in the future. It is really exciting for me to introduce our speakers and the topic of intentional peer support. When I really discovered how to tremendously create transformation, it was learning about intentional peer support by Sherry Mead and RAP by Mary Ellen Copeland. So it's a wonderful opportunity for the Copeland Center to be hosting this webinar today. I'll tell you a little bit about our speakers from Intentional Peer Support IPS. First speaking will be Stephen Morgan. He's the operations manager for IPS. Stephen has worked in peer support service for the past decade. I've had the pleasure of coming across our paths a few times at a few meetings. He was originally trained as a Georgia certified peer specialist, and he's worked for many years in the traditional mental health agencies and became very familiar with the difficulties of practicing, peer support, recovery, and wellness within a disease model that the system predominantly operates under. He's moved on to create alternatives in many ways. In Vermont, he helped create a peer-run respite. He served on several boards of directors for peer support organizations. And we're really happy that in 2013 he joined the Intentional Peer Support as the operations manager. And he's joined by Eva, who's the training manager. Eva has been involved in human rights activism for over 2 decades. In particular, she has focused on infusing trauma-informed practices that are recovery-based and person-centered. She really believes the path to healing and recovery is through relationships and creating opportunities for empowerment, building connection, inclusivity, and building supportive community. So you can tell for many of you who've been familiar with the Copeland Center for many years, you probably know exactly why these two speakers are joining the Copeland Center, and we're happy to have them talk about intentional peer support. So thank you again for joining us, and please enjoy. Without further ado, Stephen and Eva.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. So this is Stephen Morgan. And thank you to the Copeland Center for sort of giving us the opportunity here to give an introduction or an overview, the kind of Reader Digest version of intentional peer support. One of the things that the RAP and IPS share in common is we both sort of come from grassroots people with lived experience trying to really think about doing things differently and create alternatives to the traditional sort of disease and medical models. And it's great to sort of find ways to ally together and to try and keep this movement going and alive and well. So Matthew sort of touched on my bio. I'll just say a few more words about myself and how I came to IPS, and then we'll get rolling. I'm a psychiatric survivor. I got caught up in the mental health system in my early 20s, and I sort of got the messages that that my life was going to be steered off course, that I was going to be chronically mentally ill, and that came with lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of just in case you didn't catch that, lots of prescriptions, and so there was sort of years of my life where I was on that course. I then ended up finding out about peer support, got involved in working in peer support. And it was terrific because I met a community of people there who were talking about this stuff like recovery and self-determination, and that really opened my eyes to a lot of new possibilities. But I ended up practicing peer support in the traditional sort of mental health system, and I felt like it got stuck somewhere. I think we were focusing way too much on trying to get people better And there was a lot of assumptions in that kind of mentality. We were trying to help people set goals and help people do this, and I was always trying to get people to kind of follow my agenda for what I thought recovery was. And so anyhow, I ended up, I came across intentional peer support, and it really kind of rocked my world because it presented a different way of thinking about peer support that I hadn't heard before. And so once this sort of seed was planted, it was hard to kind of put out the sprout. So I kind of followed that trail, and I ended up getting out of working in traditional mental health services and started getting really interested in working in peer-run communities, starting peer-run services, starting stuff that was just completely outside of the traditional system, that was run by people with lived experience, that had sort of the values of that. And that's what I've been doing the last 5 or 6 years. And as Matthew said, just came with intentional peer support last year as a trainer and as the operations manager.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So I'm Eva Dech, and I wanted to just add a little bit to my introduction, and thank you guys for all being here on the webinar. I come from New York State, and I am a psychiatric survivor. I'm a trauma survivor, and my path led me from abuse and domestic violence growing up to be very disconnected from myself and my family. And this led me to hospitalizations and really being institutionalized for more than 4 years as an adolescent. And I had the message that, you know, I was told I was ill, and it was going to be a life sentence of medication and institutionalization. And during those years that I was institutionalized, I was forced to live in environments of violence and fear, really exposed and experienced restraint, seclusion, chemical restraints, and I really felt punished and re-traumatized. And the one turning point that really helped me during those years was a relationship that really shifted the way that I saw myself, and I regained my personal power. And I began to see myself as a survivor. So I was able to turn a lot of anger into passion to change the systems and to really create more alternatives. And I had an opportunity when I came home, and I was part of starting a peer support movement in New York State, and then nationally for youth and young adults. And we created a safe space for connection, supporting each other, and really healing through mutual supportive relationships. And through these years, we were able to really build collective power and see ourselves as citizens and creating community. And we went on to really to take social action, to fight against social injustice and for human rights. And I became an activist and working towards creating positive systems transformation for many years, infusing trauma-informed practices and services, and really creating trauma-informed communities. Helping to have more access to alternatives and create more alternatives to the traditional mental health system. And then also protecting the integrity of peer support and fighting for rights of parents with psychiatric disabilities as well. This led me, and I've done that for 2 decades, and this led me to become part of intentional peer support, which really offers a framework for offering one another a different way of thinking about our experiences and being part of social change. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you,
So,
Eva.
thanks.
Yeah, so let's dive into to IPS, and so you can see on your screen, Sherry Mead created intentional peer support on the backs of many others, and she wrote her kind of narrative about how she came to create it. That's available on our website for free. It's under the articles section. It's called Intentional Peer Support: A Personal Retrospective. Basically, Sherry was locked up as a kid, as a teenager in the mental health system, and this is in a very bad time of institutionalization, or sort of the old school electric shock. Definitely no sort of messages of recovery or anything like that going on back then. She managed to get out. She actually became a jazz musician for a while and found real community there. And what was interesting was some of the same things, experiences that she would have that before were called illness, like staying up all night, were sort of seen as normal in the musician community. So she really kind of found, I think, a tribe there and managed to do that for a while. But if you fast forward a few decades, when she was a mother, had sort of been in a bad relationship, and she ended up back in the mental health system. And this time she kind of got stuck for a while. And it wasn't until someone challenged her, it was actually a social worker in a hospital one day, to sort of do something different with their life, that she kind of, all of a sudden a light bulb came back on. She realized that she could actually have some control over her life again, or she could make choices, and she had forgotten that through years of sort of being in and out of the system. So she got interested in doing something different, but when she went back to her community, she realized there was nothing in the community for people that was sort of outside what she had already kind of received. So she was challenged to kind of open up something and try something different, and so she got involved running a peer support agency, a peer house, and an overnight respite center. And she stayed with that for about 6 years, and they started doing different kinds of things there for people that were in crisis or people whose lives were kind of caught up in the mental health system. And at the same time, she was doing kind of advanced studies and drawing on a lot of material from organizational change, from systems theory, from sociology, anthropology. And she ended up kind of siphoning that down to try and create a way of talking about how we can do peer support that keeps it unique, and that keeps it evolving, and that keeps it, in some ways, I guess, effective. So that's what she did. She wrote a book called Intentional Peer Support, and we've been around sort of training in this material for the last 10 or 15 years in various incarnations. And this sort of giant snapshot, what is intentional peer support? You know, IPS, it's about creating relationships that make it okay for us not just to be in peer relationships, but to use them as a tool to take a bigger look at how we've learned to operate in the world. And so the focus that Sherry wanted to keep alive and real in peer support was the relationship. She wanted to bring things, instead of it being focused on individuals, to bring it back to thinking about how can we use relationships to look at ourselves, to look at each other, and to change and to grow from that.
Okay, and looking at intentional peer support, it's a real shift. Instead of looking at there's a problem with you and it's your responsibility to change your life, we start to think about how we can be mutually accountable. How this can be not just about you, but about us, where relationships start to be viewed as partnerships that invite and inspire both of us to learn and grow. Rather than, you know, I'm here to help you because you're different in some way or you have a problem. The focus on what is possible is what we're talking about, and what we also can co-create together. A lot of times we focus on stopping or avoiding what we don't want. Many times we're focused on, you know, our mood all the time and anxiety. And this is an opportunity to not just get stuck in that. Many of us lose touch of what we want, and when we focus much on what we don't want and what's wrong. So this is about building conversations that and relationships that energize creating new ways of thinking.
Yeah, and we sort of, in IPS, there's 3 overarching principles, and there's 4 tasks. So the principles are much like, you know, people have principles that kind of guide how they make decisions. There's principles in IPS that sort of, I guess, overlay all of the other kind of material. And those 3 principles are shifting from a focus on helping to a focus on learning, and shifting from a focus on the individual to a focus on the relationship, and shifting from fear-based responses and fear-based relationships to hope-based. So we're going to look a little bit more in depth at these principles, and then we'll look at the tasks in a moment as well. So this first principle, shifting from helping to learning, is really about thinking right from the outset, what is my role in this relationship, and what are we here to do together? I don't know about you all, but when I first came into peer support, I used to, when people would ask me, my motivation, I would just say I want to help people, which is fine. It came from good intentions. I guess I didn't ever really step back and think about where that came from and what that meant, especially because we oftentimes end up helping people with the ways that we were helped before and the ways that we experienced that. So sometimes we just end up replicating the same systemic ways of doing things. So this is, when I come into the relationship and want to help you, this sets up a dynamic in our relationship. And, it affects what I think is my purpose in the relationship. And it affects how I think, how it feels to be in that role. It affects how I start to measure success in a relationship. So if I'm here to help you, I often will measure success, for instance, by how much you change. And if you're on the other end of that, and if you're always being helped, so if you're someone that's just always receiving help, of course, that gives you certain messages as well. That gives the message that perhaps you're fragile and capable, quote, incompetent, end quote, or that you need sort of someone else there to guide you. And it can kind of set up this dynamic where one person has more power, one person's the expert, and one person is sort of becomes the recipient of that expertise. Again, usually starts off with good intentions going into helping relationships, but oftentimes can kind of, especially over the long term, create these real imbalances. So in IPS, I want to think about shifting the focus to learning instead, that what we're there to do together is not necessarily me help you, but is for us to learn together. And I think about this as if, if you and I, we don't know each other and we meet each other and we're going to go travel to a foreign country together. If I've been to the foreign country and we go over there, then it's going to be a very particular kind of relationship. I'm going to tell you about what's in that country. I'm going to tell you about the currency exchange, about who to talk to, where to go, how to have fun, the drinks, the food. And it ends up sort of being a little bit on my agenda. If we go to that foreign country and neither of us has ever been together, we go from this position of not knowing, we go from this position of learning, and then what we end up doing is we explore together with a sense of equality in our relationship. And when we do that, I guess we both stay the experts kind of on our own experience, and we both figure out things together. So we talk about shifting from helping to learning as the first principle, and the second principle is shifting from a focus on the individual to a focus on relationship. So right now, so much of the quote helping professions are focused on the person that's on the other side of the desk or on the couch. It's focused on getting that person to change. And so when we keep that focus on the individual, we predetermine outcomes. We want them to change. We want we want them to get a job or to stop acting in certain ways. It becomes all about that one person, and oftentimes we lose sight of our own learning. So when we shift that focus to the relationship, instead of it being about you changing or you sort of following an agenda, it becomes about both of us are actually going to contribute to the learning here. We're both going to actually be a part of this. We're both going to be authentic about who we are. We're going to negotiate things. We're going to talk about our needs and our experiences. And we're going to keep it there. So the focus shifts. Instead of what does this individual need, the shift is to what does our relationship need? What does our relationship need for both of us to stay present? What does our relationship need for both of us to stay growing? What does our relationship need for both of us to be able to challenge one another so that it's not just coming in one direction?
Okay, so the third principle is moving and shifting the focus from fear to hope. And fear-based relationships are based on what's wrong, what we're afraid is going to happen. And when you really think about it, most of traditional mental health services are about what we don't want and what we are afraid of. Um, you know, take a minute and think of times in your life where other people have been afraid of you, or you know what you were going to do, or what might happen. And how did that affect the way you thought about yourself? And how did that affect your relationships? Um, for many of us, it becomes a very stuck place, a place where I feel I'm being seen as something to be feared, something to be stopped, and definitely it's very limiting. But hope-based relationships are based on what's possible, where we're going, and how we can create something new together. It's shifting the focus to what we are energized about and what's possible. Um, the energy in the relationship completely changes, and the focus, um, the energy, the focus, and even the desire to be in the relationship can completely shift. It allows us to stay open, and it can expose and create possibilities that didn't exist before. We often use a metaphor for moving from fear to hope, of looking at a metaphor of music. And the first one is making noise, and then the second one is making music. So I'll read that for you now. I start off with the melody. You notice that I miss a, oh, excuse me, guys. Hold on one moment. I start off with the melody. You notice I miss a couple of notes. So you say, I can't follow you when you're messing up. Let me start. You begin a melody, this time in a different key. It doesn't sound anything like what I'm used to. So I put down my instrument and watch. You're frustrated. So you say, just play what I'm playing. You'll be glad when you learn it. It will help you become an expert like me. I try to mimic it and please you, but deep down, it isn't my style. Yet now we sound similar. So you say, that's great, man. You're on track. So that's making noise. And making music is, I start off with a melody. You notice a few notes I play are unconventional, but you're curious where this could go. You start experimenting and soon find a rhythm that complements mine. When I hear yours, I answer back. Now we're playing together and harmonizing. Our combined sound is more interesting than our individual parts, even though we had no plan except to a mutual desire to play together. We're exploring. Later, you take us into a different key that I don't recognize. It's frustrating, even scary for a moment. But as I listen deeply and feel around my instrument, I find it and join you there. Now we're back on track. Where will we go next? And we use this as a metaphor, as you can see in making noise, that it was very limiting, and it was, I'm wrong and you're right. But in making music, this allowed for us, even though it may have been uncomfortable at times and a little bit scary, we didn't know where it was going, but we were open to the possibility, and we were able to meet each other and co-create something together. So this is a metaphor of really being open, and being able to see what journey and what we can co-create together.
Great. And so so we've got these principles of moving from helping to learning, and moving from individual to relationship, and moving from fear-based responses to hope-based responses. And, what does it take to get there? And some of the challenges of that are, first of all, sitting with discomfort. As Eva was saying in that music metaphor, that, if we're coming to play music together and what you're playing, I don't like the sound of it. I can either try and tell you that what you're doing stinks and that you should just follow what I'm doing, or I can really try and hear it from a different perspective and be willing to sit with the fact that I'm uneasy about this kind of stuff. So, and during our training and during our material, we come back to this a lot with sitting with discomfort. especially when we talk about kind of what we traditionally think of as challenging scenarios around the language of suicide and self-injury, or alternate realities, that oftentimes just being willing to sit with discomfort, so not just respond or act on discomfort, it really does open up different avenues for staying connected in the relationship, for understanding one another. One of the second challenges that we talk about is, holding multiple truths. And this is the idea that, you have a truth about the world, and it's true because it's true to you. I have a truth about the world, and it's true because it's true to me. And when we come together in relationship, those truths are obviously sometimes not going to jive well together. So how can we build a relationship where we're able to honor both people's truths, still passionately believe what we believe, but be able to keep the relationship going, keep it alive with both of our truths present. And then lastly, a real willingness to take risks is important. I was thinking about this last night with risks. Risk has become this kind of thing that people want to minimize. There's all these protocols to minimize risk. It sort of seems safety and risk go hand in hand. So it's like the less risk we have, the more safety we have. Well, yeah, you might have more safety in terms of more control, but what you probably also will get when you kind of come from that mentality is you're going to get a lot of stuck people and a lot of stuck systems, because real growth, real movement, real evolution comes when I'm willing to take risks, sometimes really hard risks, when I'm willing to fail, and when that's okay, and when that's part of the possibilities of growing. So we're going to shift. We looked at the principles. We're going to shift. We're going to look at the tasks. And the four tasks of intentional peer support. So if you think about the principles as kind of the overarching philosophy, you can think about these tasks as, what are some of the elements of what I do in relationships, in intentional peer support relationships with people. And so we talk about connection. We talk about understanding worldview, going for mutuality, and having the relationship focused on moving towards. So we're going to dive a little bit more into each of those.
And so we're going to move into the first task of connection. And connection is something that, can be really hard to describe. It's a feeling. Just think of how you know when you're connected with someone. For me, it's you know when you're connected, and you really know when you're not connected with someone. Suddenly the energy has shifted. Connection is rather, it's intangible. It can happen in a second. There's many times I'm just walking down the street, and I make eye contact, and I can feel that connection with a person. Or there's times when I'm at the grocery store, or standing at a bus stop, and strike up a conversation, and I feel that connection with that person. So it can happen very quickly. There's also times where, connection can, it can take a lifetime to really build and work on. What connection creates is a sense of belonging, that I'm not alone, and that we're really in this together. It builds trust, which leads to learning for both of us. And it also serves to move the focus away from the individual and into the shared space between us in the relationship. So looking at disconnection, as quickly as we connect, we can also disconnect. And it can be challenging to find a way to reconnect. It can happen in many ways. There's many ways that people feel disconnected. Sometimes it's just a sense of judgment, or you're lecturing me, or there's been times where people just get distracted, and I feel that I'm not being heard, and I can feel disconnected. If someone's moralizing or trying to analyze you, and we all have these individual hot buttons too, that can cause a disconnection right away. But reconnection is always a possibility, And I think, when there's a disconnection, we usually blame ourselves, like, oh, we've messed up again, or we definitely blame the other person. Um, and we don't really consider that reconnection is an option, and that there may be many ways to talk about what happened that can create an even deeper relationship. So looking at how to reconnect, there's really no set formula, but definitely I think a good heartfelt apology can really start that reconnection. If I can own my own part in what happened, and also just really checking in too of, it looks like something I've said has upset you, what's going on. I think being honest is definitely key, and you're able to say, I was really hurt by that, or that really made me angry. I wonder if we could talk about it. So it's about finding ways to reconnect, um, to bring out whatever elephant is in the room, and once we're able to start that reconnection and open up the conversation, it really can create a deeper relationship.
So, so we talk about connection being the first task because oftentimes without connection, you can't get anywhere else. If you come into a relationship and you don't have that connection, it's just kind of, yep, yes. It's very hard to find areas to feel energized with. And I think ultimately that's the goal with intentional peer support, or one of the goals is to have energizing relationships. So we talk about making connection first, and then we talk about sort of understanding worldview. Now, this term worldview means kind of, as it says, it's my view of the world. But what the term also holds is it means that the way that I view the world has been shaped by a lifetime of experiences. And even beyond my own life, my ancestors' experiences. And so actually, the way that I see the world, the things that I believe are true, the things I believe are right, the things I believe are wrong, these come from experiences of culture, they come from experiences of race, they come from experiences of religion, of class, of gender, and how society thinks about gender. They come from experiences of, access I have to different foods, of experiences I have of power and privilege in different environments. All these kinds of experiences, these sort of social experiences, impact how I then come to see what I think is right and wrong, what I think is good or bad, my judgments and my assumptions. So understanding worldview means paying attention not to just what I see right in front of me with a person or with myself, but understanding actually how did I come to know my experiences in the way that I know them? How did I come to know what I know? How did you come to know what you know? You might come up to me and start talking to me about how you're feeling depressed. And if I jump right into, oh, I get it, man. Yeah, depression, that's terrible, man. Yeah, I'm so tired all the time when I'm depressed. I'm sorry to hear. I'm going off of my own sort of assumptions about what it means and where I learned that word and everything. You might have a completely different concept of what something like that means to you. So we talk about worldview as sort of like is staying curious about it, and this means that if everyone sort of has a worldview and everyone is sort of shaped by experiences, that actually the impact of trauma in many of our lives, because many of us that use mental health services have had trauma, sometimes extensive trauma, means that we were shaped by that, or likely shaped by that. So we shift the focus from, instead of what's wrong with you, or this idea of disease in your brain and your skull, where the focus is all on you and what's wrong, and it's as if you just arrived out of, a spaceship where there was no history. Instead of that, a trauma-informed approach, we start to think about actually what happened to you. Where do you come from, man? You're feeling really scared. What experiences did you have in your life that would lead to you feeling this way? And we start to sort of see the bigger picture. So staying aware of worldview and keeping worldview at the forefront keeps us curious about who I am myself and who the other person is. It creates an awareness of my own assumptions so that I can check myself when I go in and I see somebody. I'm going to make all kinds of assumptions about that person, whether I want to or not. It's involuntary. But those assumptions happen based on experiences I've had, things I've been taught. So how can I be aware of that stuff so that I can listen to a person in a way that really, I guess, brings out new stories, different stories, that opens up things instead of just becomes stuck in my own narrative or my own biases or my own judgments. So keeping worldview at the forefront is also sort of about stretching and enriching my own perspective. And worldview is why, when you look at this picture right here, this person, and we ask you, what's going on here? So we're going to get a variety of responses. Some people are going to say, oh, that woman is looking out the window because she's having a really bad day. Someone else is going to say, that's not a woman, that's a dude with long hair, and he just came back from a concert and he's contemplating the next song he's going to write. Someone else is going to say, this person is praying. And all of these kinds of assumptions about what you think the person is doing is going to affect how you approach them. If you see them as praying, you might go up to them and say, can I pray with you? I'm a holy person as well. If you see them and you think, oh, that person's really sad, you might go up and say, hey, is everything okay? And what's important is the way you approach them, what you do based on what you see there is going to affect how they respond, and it's going to affect what you get in that relationship. So if I go there and I say, hey, you want to pray? And she said, yeah, sure, and we end up praying together. But if I go there and I say, hey, what's wrong? Is everything okay? Maybe now she thinks, oh, is something wrong? Maybe now I've kind of created the scenario where we're gonna float into that kind of conversation. It kind of limits the possibilities. So just paying attention to how my worldview ends up coming up with how I'm seeing relationships, how I'm seeing people, and how I'm seeing the world. So as I said before, with being trauma-informed, trauma has likely impacted people. Trauma often, shapes worldview, just as all experiences shape worldview. But the way that trauma shapes worldview is sometimes, called symptoms of mental illness. And so being trauma-informed is about kind of offering a different lens, a different worldview on the same phenomenon that we've been calling, symptoms for so long. Maybe there's a different way of looking at that and understanding where that came from. And if we have a different way of looking at it and a different way of understanding, we have a different way of responding. And I think that's kind of, keeping worldview alive with intentional peer support is trying to keep those possibilities open so that we can respond from multiple perspectives, multiple angles, and not just come from one sort of linear path. So we talk about connection and then worldview, and then the third task is mutuality. And mutuality, is really the core of peer. I think of all peer support, but it's really the core of intentional peer support. It's about redefining help. Mutuality means that if the relationship is not working for both of us, it's not working. So it means that both of us are present in that relationship. The relationship goes both ways. We both give, we both receive. And that doesn't mean that I fear sometimes that peer support's going in the direction of, oh yeah, I've got mutuality because when I help that person, I feel better about myself. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about there's actually that both people are authentically present with who they are in that relationship, and that both people get to experience that pleasure of helping one another. Mutuality often happens in moments, in little moments. There's times where I might give you a hand up, times where you might give me a hand up. And it's really about moving away from a service type relationship. As Sherry says, that if my motivation is for you to change, then we're in a service relationship. So it's about getting away from me, my motivation not being for you to change, but my motivation really to be about, let's build a relationship where we can learn about each other and we can grow from that. And we can support each other and we can challenge each other once we've got trust. And so with that comes mutual responsibility, which means that we both have to put in to take care of the relationship. So no longer is it about you sort of, having to follow my plan, or me having to just take care of you. So if I'm used to being a service provider, maybe it doesn't work for me if I have to sit down and just hear you out for 20 minutes every day or something. So mutual responsibility means that I can actually communicate about how that's impacting me and what I'd like to be done differently. So when we expand on this stuff in our training, this gets us into boundaries. We talk a lot about power and privilege and how that impacts relationships. Gets us into the perennial question of, is peer support more like therapy, more like friendships, or something altogether different? And we go down those bunny trails and really unpack some of these concepts a lot more.
So looking at the fourth task is moving towards. And it's kind of an alchemy that happens when we have connection, worldview, and mutuality, and they all come together, and it really accumulates in moving towards. It happens when both of our worldviews are there and are present. And it's a kind of energy that make hope and possibility the underlining spirit of the conversation, and it creates new opportunities. We're able to find possibilities and opportunities that weren't, that when we're moving away from a crisis and draining energy is always present. When we're moving towards something, there's a very energizing possibility of moving towards something unknown that is exciting. So, and I can say for myself, crisis in my life, even with extreme loss and many painful experiences, have been some of the most best opportunities in my life, where I've had growth and really have been able to reflect and look at what I want to be moving towards. So, I mean, think back on your life in your own crises, and what have you learned from them? And what have you seen as moving towards and doing different now, and what was made possible? I give an example of, if your house burned down, that's a huge tragedy, but it may be an opportunity to move, or to build a new house, or to create, go to a new community and create a new life. So sometimes when it's really difficult, when we have difficult times in our life, we end up on a completely different pathway. And so it's looking at moving towards new opportunities. We can develop, self-awareness and patterns, and identify patterns where we've been stuck. And through the process of relating and evolving our relationships, both people are able to really push through the edges of our own, comfort zone. And through this, we build a conversation that is energizing, creating new ways of thinking and creating new possibility. So looking at peer support, we are putting energy into mutual learning relationship as opposed to service relationships. It's an opportunity for us to connect, reconnect with our world, our family, our culture, and the community at large. It gives us an opportunity to help each other take a look at how we've come to make sense of the world, redefining mental health for ourselves and also for our community, and figuring out how to make this work for both of us. We're supporting and challenging each other to move towards the life we want and changing the world. And when we talk about changing the world, it's our hope that when our relationships start to have new life and energy, this affects other relationships that we have with our family and our community. And this starts to become the social change and the beginning of changing the world.
So that, I want to take a minute to just say a few more things about intentional peer support. Now that you kind of had this bird's eye view, our website has got a lot of information on it about what kind of trainings we offer. We have, a manual available or a workbook. Our trainings, our core trainings, we do a 5-day training with some of this material, and we really dive in. And we ask hard questions, and we get into the tough stuff with this. Crisis can be an opportunity for growth and change. Crisis can also be scary as hell. It can also be really difficult. So how do we navigate some of those scenarios? How do we create mutuality in relationships where one of us gets getting paid, or where one of us doesn't feel like caring? And so we get into role plays. It's all very hands-on, very interactive, very dialogical, meaning that the conversation flows both ways, flows from us and then comes back from y'all. And we really try and sort of unpack this, because even though we've got this sort of framework, IPS is a framework for thinking about relationships, in reality, this stuff gets really muddy and really messy really quick. So we're committed to really diving in and fearing not that space, and really trying to understand how this stuff can apply in a variety of scenarios. IPS is currently used in several countries across the world. It's in Australia, and New Zealand, and England, and Japan, and Scotland, and a little bit in Canada, and mostly in the U.S. And it's currently used in both pure run settings and in traditional mental health settings, and outside of mental health settings. It's starting to be used in housing services. We're doing some work with youth services or youth supports. I even had a guy call me to do IPS with people that have black lung, they're coal miners. So we're starting to kind of branch out, and we're trying to keep our material developing with that kind of branching out to make it more universally applicable and available. So 2 last things, as you can see on our contact details, our website. That's our email address. You're welcome to write us. That will reach me and Eva and Chris Hansen, who's the director of IPS. And also the artwork. Most of the artwork through here was done by our friend and colleague, Beth Filson. So just want to mention that. She's makes extraordinary art, and there is her, her website if you want to look into it more. So Matthew and Katie.
Well, thank you guys so much for this presentation about IPS. It has been very interesting to hear about the developments and where you guys have come from. We're just going to take a quick second so that I can get the questions together and say a few things about some of the projects we have coming up with the Copeland Center, as well as some other opportunities that are available. Matthew, would you like to talk about the Copeland Center Summit?
Yeah, so, well, first, Eva and Stephen, thank you for that wonderful presentation. It was really kind of great to hear the points you're making, and it really kind of got my passions going for peer support movement. And I hope we get to some of the questions that came up that people had. I think they're great ones, and we're on the cusp of transformation in the world with RAP and IPS both. So in November 10th, 11th, and 12th at State College, we will be holding our second Copeland Center Summit on wellness, peer support, and community inclusion. At this event, we'll have training opportunities on things like RAP for total health. We're going to be joined by Sherry Mead's IPS team, as you heard today. Team members from IPS will be at the summit as well. Harvey Rosenthal of NIAPSRS, a peer-based psych rehab association in New York. Harvey's the executive director. He'll be coming and talking about opportunities for peer support in the Affordable Care Act and what that means for us. We'll also be hearing from Gina Calhoun, National Director from the Copeland Center, who will be keynoting. Myself, Jeannie Whitecraft, who has been a long-term friend of both Sherry Meads and Marion Copeland, and who's pioneered peer programs. One of the first peer programs in the country that was used for the COSP study, Consumer Operated Services study, that demonstrated the value of peers or people with lived experience providing services. She'll be there and speaking as well. So we hope you will take the opportunity to join us. We're anticipating around 400 recovery-friendly, peer-based people in the movement coming together to support each other and share practices and figure out how we're going to make this seismic shift of a system that's so focused on disease models. There are discounts for this summit coming up for memberships, people who are members of the organization, and you can keep checking in with our website about the details of that summit coming up.
Great, thank you, Matthew. I also wanted to just let everyone know that the Copeland Center does offer membership, and that allows us to have these great events and partner with other organizations and bring all sorts of programming to them. And there are a lot of great benefits of membership, including a members-only section of our website and online opportunities, discounts to trainings, and other really special stuff. And then the Copeland Center has a RAP facilitator training coming up in Brattleboro, Vermont on September 29th to October 3rd for anyone who might be interested in facilitator training. We also have some great things to report to you from RAP and Recovery Books, who published the RAP books. The Wellness Recovery Action Plan and Peer Support, which was written by Mary Ellen Copeland and Sherry Mead, is actually on sale for the month of July. So if you want to get that at a discounted price, please go to rapandrecoverybooks.com and you'll be able to see that that's available. It's also available in Spanish for our Spanish-speaking colleagues. So we'd like to thank RAP and Recovery Books for making that available at a discount for you guys this month. And they'd also, RAP and Recovery Books has also asked us to tell you a little bit about that Mary Ellen has written a new book called RAP for Life, which is going to be a revision of Winning Against Relapse, which was a great book to begin with, and now it's going to be this whole new title that's going to be very good, and it should be coming out in the next few weeks. So you should, if you're interested in RAP books, you should definitely take a look out for those. All right, well, I think we are probably ready for questions. So I'm going to...
And Katie, for one of those questions, is this webinar recorded and going to be available on the members section of the website?
This recording, we are recording this session, and that will be available after broadcast. So you'll get more details on that in your wrap-up email from this webinar. All right, well, I have a wonderful bank of questions here, you guys. Are you guys ready for some questions?
Yes.
You are?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
I am getting quite a lot of questions from people who work as peer support specialists or peers, and they are really curious about how this works as a paid person. Like, can you be a peer specialist where you are being engaged and being paid to use IPS? Like, is that a conflict, or can that work?
Yes, I mean, it definitely can work. I think you start with an ideal, and mutuality is a task in IPS. And true mutuality would mean that that one of us is not getting paid. But that's not the reality on the ground with doing peer support. Nor do I think it should be. I think that should be one option. But certainly having sort of paid peer support has created a kind of proliferation of available supports and different kind of alternative supports that I don't think would have happened otherwise. So I think yes. I think if you get too purist about any model, it's very hard to practice a model, and we really try in a pure way. We try and really in IPS get out of the notions of right or wrong and see it as that this is a framework for thinking about relationships, and the most important thing with the framework is to try it on and to kind of think about how these concepts, worldview, connection, do I have connection in this relationship? Am I paying attention to worldview? Is mutuality present? Think about it in your own relationships, and if it doesn't seem like you have those tasks, that's fine too. It's about learning. I mean, so I guess at the end of the day, the answer would be yes. You can be paid and have it, and the other answer would be that's the kind of stuff where we dive a lot more into in our trainings. It comes up every time because it's a big question, and something that's that we continue to struggle with, trying to figure out ways of thinking about that together.
Great. Well, thanks for the answer around that. So that was the sort of the first genre of questions around peer support specialists, and then the second one, and I'll read this one directly, although we've heard I have a bunch in my queue about the same thing, which how does IPS work in a hospital situation where a peer transition specialist job is to develop relationships with individual care? And now you guys talked a little bit about that. But then the second part of it, how does IPS change the dynamics within a place where there is both the medical model and sort of a peer model as well? Or does it? I guess that's another question sort of in there.
Those are great questions. Y'all are making me put on my thinking cap, which is beautiful, which can go hand in hand with the more I have to think, the more coffee I will be drinking on this side of the microphone. The hospital question, it's yes, IPS is used in hospital settings. It's used with people that take notes. I mean, look, there's psychiatrists that we've trained that use IPS in their own practice, so it can be used by anybody. It does sort of get adapted in different forms, but again, IPS is more like concepts. We don't get into the real, like, this is exactly what you must do with somebody. And because of that, it's these principles, they can kind of flow into what you currently do in some incarnation or another. The second question about sort of systems change, it's hard when we go and we train people that work in peer support in larger systems where they can't really practice some of the things that we're talking about, like mutual relationships or even like spending time to make connection. So we're cognizant of that. When we do trainings, for instance, we do try and bring in, always sort of recommend that supervisors, that people at all kind of programmatic levels come to the training. So, for instance, we have some projects where we're training a lot of people, like in New York City with the Parachute Project, a lot of people at different levels of administration, everyone down from the medical director down to, the person does direct peer support service, or not down to, I don't want to say that, over to. Every single, person is trained in IPS so that they all kind of get the overall framework, and that's certainly helpful. We're also working on creating documents and supports so that organizations could adapt more to some of the values and principles of IPS. So that's kind of a work in progress.
Well, that's very informative around sort of both the individual and systems change levels. We do have a great question here from Kathy, who says, I'd like to start to make the shifts you're describing. How do I start? How do I start initiating a conversation on this topic?
Eva, what do you think? You want to take that, or?
Well, I think talking about that this is a different way than people are used to relating, and I think really building on the connection and spending time with connecting with people is the first step. And we're used to being in a helper-helpee type of relationship. So it's about being honest about how this is a new way of working together that may be uncomfortable for both people, but really looking at the value of having mutuality and negotiating that and talking about and especially in different settings. It may be challenging, but that can be an ongoing conversation. But putting it really out there that this is a different way of communicating and building that mutual respect and mutual responsibility within the relationship. And then exploring, being curious about the other person in the world, our individual worldviews, and allowing for room to really take a step back and look at how we've come to know what we know. And letting that relationship build trust and naturally unfold to seeing where people want to be moving towards, instead of being used to, goal setting and moving away from crisis, but allowing that this is an opportunity to really look at what kind of life do you want to be living, and have that energy be moving towards a different way of having a relationship and a different way of living your life.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too that I gathered from the question that she was wondering about too, how she could talk to, she wants to make the shifts, but also how she could talk to the people that she works with about doing this. And
yes, an advocacy sort of part.
Yeah, there was an article in our last two newsletter ago. It's on our website. It's a fall newsletter called "Talking in Ways That Can Be Heard," which was written by Sherry, and it was just about that, exactly, about talking with folks that may have a very different way of doing things and want a different way of doing things, and trying to talk in a way that where the dialogue can flow. It's a big question, and it's an important question, because it sucks that often, I think in any kind of social change movement, sometimes the responsibility falls on the people that have been sort of victimized or oppressed by systems to then try and change the system. So it sucks to just throw in a peer support specialist, one person, into a giant agency and say, okay, now go change the whole system. But that's kind of the reality of what we're living with. And so if we can sort of build camaraderie around that and network together, I think it'll feel more doable.
And Stephen, speaking of camaraderie, if I can make a point or two.
Oh yeah,
Well, it's funny. I've been called a purist when it comes to peer support, and I'm amongst friends now. But in practicality and seeing the questions, one of the things that I've really bottom lined a lot of conversations when it comes to people who are in hospitals in a diseased model framework for funding is really the issue. There are two really key elements of change that'll help us so that we can provide IPS and stick to our values even if we're getting paid, and that is the contracts and the job descriptions. When the contracts that are contracted to get the funding to provide the services and the job descriptions line up with the tasks of IPS, then it's a lot easier for us to stay in the relationships that we want to have, as you talked about, and not feel compromised. But a lot of times you'll see that people have placed peer support into contracts and into jobs where the job description isn't really kind of speaking to the kinds of things that you talked about today. And if the contracts and the job descriptions line up, there are two aspects to the funding stream. There are outcomes, which is often what the system wants, decreased hospitalization, these types of things. And we can give them what they want as long as the deliverables that we're saying these deliverables will give us these outcomes, as long as those deliverables, i.e. the tasks and activities, are IPS-based task activities. We know that people will have positive outcomes when they have people who support them that stay in the relationship. So sometimes we have to talk that language. We need to make sure that deliverables for funding streams are focused on IPS principles, and they can have their outcomes. And we can say, if we focus on the relationship between both of us, yes, one of us will have these positive outcomes. But if the contracts and the job descriptions don't really speak to that, then when we're getting supervision, we can run into barriers. That's just been my observation, and the key things I think we have to really be talking about to make these things real in the system.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'll just say one last thing with it is that, when we sort of dive into, okay, so in my job, I've got to take notes on someone, we start to get into, well, what would notes look like if they were focused on the relationship instead of focused on the individual? Is there a way to take notes where you're actually writing about the quality of the relationship and how it's going for yourself, and that the other person contributes to that? I mean, I know that Medicaid, I took notes as a Georgia peer specialist. I did the Medicaid reimbursable stuff for years. I know that this is tricky stuff to get around, but I think there's some creative avenues there, and kind of as you were saying, Matthew, sometimes it's doing what needs to be done in that world, but also still, doing sort of peer support, like it's not so mechanized or not so outcomes driven on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is a very good point about that. And I mean, to me, what I'm taking away from this is that we can use IPS in our relationships, and trying to build our relationships no matter who we are, whether we're paid or not to do that. And so, the way that it can at least have transformation on your own life is trying to create those kinds of relationships with others, no matter what kind of system you're in. Would you say that
Sure.
that's like a fair assessment?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well
Well,
put.
I have to say, I'm so sorry that our hour is already up, and I thank everyone for hanging on a few extra minutes. It's been so wonderful to have you, Eva and Stephen. This is a conversation I hope we can continue and talk more about sort of the crossing nature of intentional peer support and RAP in the future. But getting this first sort of view into intentional peer support for RAP enthusiasts and intentional peer support enthusiasts has been really wonderful. And I hope that we can do this again in the near future. And if you guys like this, definitely consider coming to the Copeland Center Summit in November so that we can continue the conversation there as well as online. So thank you guys so much for this. Matthew, do you have any final comments before we log everyone off?
No, just thank you, and looking forward to ongoing collaboration. These are powerful programs, and we could use all the support of people out there to move in the direction of these values. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.